Forgot to mute myself. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Library Adventures Live. I'm Ambreen, and as usual, I'm incredibly excited to be hosting today. Now, I'm sure you'll all agree with me. The last lull was quite a few belly laughs. It was with Jake Hope and Genevieve, who talked about their picture book, Cheesed Off. A great one, by the way. If you've not had the chance to watch it, you can catch up on that and any other lulls on www.kirkleyslibraries.co.uk/lal. Now, I have a very special guest with me today. So if you have any questions, don't forget you can write them in the comments and we'll ask him later on in the lull. So we have with us Adam Murphy. Now, Adam, and along with his wife, Lisa Murphy, are an award-winning husband and wife comic making team. And Adam and Lisa Murphy are the creator of the comic series called Corpse Talk, which I have with me here. It's a lovely book, absolutely amazing content in it. And I think it's one of the first comic books that we've actually had on our LAL sessions. So that's quite exciting. And they both, the Corpse Talk series that they've done originally appeared in the Phoenix, which is a weekly kids comics magazine in the UK. Corpse Talk has since been collected and published as an ongoing series of books, not just in the UK, but in North America as well. So it's quite wide publishing at the moment. And it's also been nominated twice for the Blue Peter Books Awards. And it's the first comic ever to do so, which I think is an amazing achievement. So I'm just going to bring Adam on. Hi, Adam.
Hello, everyone. Hi there, Ambreen. How are you?
Are you okay today?
I'm very good, thank you.
It's so lovely to have you on today. I just absolutely love the whole book. I read it. I will be reading it quite a few times, to be honest. I love going back to it. But it's absolutely amazing. So I'm just going to give you the floor and let you take over.
Okay, thank you. Cool. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ambreen. So my name is Adam. I make the book Corpse Talk along with my wife. What I'm going to do today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Corpse Talk, show you a few samples and talk about kind of how it works. And then I'm going to do some live drawing. I'm going to talk to you about how I draw people from history. But because they're all dead people, I'm going to be drawing their reanimated zombie corpse. So first, let me give you a quick idea of what it is. I'll do some drawing. You guys can do some drawing at home. So if you don't have pencils and papers, I suggest you get some because you're going to need them. And then there'll be time for some questions and some cool stuff at the end as well. So Corpse Talk, as Ambreen said, it's a comic book which interviews famous people from history. But because they're all dead people, because they're all from history, I'm interviewing the reanimated zombie corpses. There's actually 6 books now, which I also have here, obviously. Corpse Talk Explorers is the most recent one. There's also Storytellers, which is kind of writers and people like that. A whole book all about women, amazing women from history. Queens and Kings, Rebels, and Scientists, which was the first collected book. So it's kind of like a TV chat show. So I'm the host and interviewer, and the cartoon version of me is talking to people. But because they're dead, I'll be talking to them as a zombie, and then there's also kind of like flashbacks to when they were alive. We find out all the cool stuff about what they got up to. So I've got a few examples here. If we can show the first slide, which will give you a sense of kind of how the comic works. So here is an interview with Christopher Columbus. So this is obviously in the Explorer's book. He's probably the most famous explorer that's in there. Although a nice thing about Corpse Talk is that we can also interview people that really aren't well known and that we should know more about. Book starts with Pythias, who's the guy who discovered Britain back when it was this completely unknown edge of the world place that people had only kind of heard of. But this one I think is a quite nice example of some of the nice things we can do with Corpse Talk. So you can see it starts with Columbus talking about how great he is and how people thought that the world was flat, and they thought that he was going to fall off the edge, but he knew the world was round, and how amazing it was, the feeling of voyaging into the unknown. And then what I really love, it doesn't always happen, but when I can actually kind kind of bring a guest down to size. That's the well-known story, but here on Crop Talk, we prefer the truth. And the truth is that nobody believed the Earth was flat for hundreds of years before you were even born. Of course, the ancient Greeks knew that the Earth was round and had actually calculated the size of it pretty accurately. But Columbus, because he taught himself, and he was convinced that he'd figured out stuff that all the other stupid people didn't understand, but he knew the real story about how big the world was, which is why he thought he'd be able to get all the way around on the amount of food and water you could fit in a ship. And he had these tiny little ships. So he was convinced that he'd be able to make it. In actual fact, everybody else thought the world was about as big as it really is. And if it had been all ocean, he would have starved or died of thirst before he got there. But as it turns out, there's this enormous, great big continent called America in the way, lucky for him. And apparently he actually died still convinced that he had found India, not America at all. So that's the kind of thing that I'm always quite pleased when I can do. I've got another little example, which is from the Storyteller's book. This is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. And this is a little bit where he's talking about how he hated writing Sherlock Holmes stories. He got completely sick of them because to everybody else, the mystery is this amazing, cool thing. How is he going to figure it out? But of course, when he starts writing the story, he already knows what the ending is going to be. So he always thought that Sherlock Holmes was this kind of, it wasn't as exciting to him. And so he came up with this idea, which was to kill Sherlock Holmes off. So he has a story where Sherlock Holmes fights his arch nemesis Moriarty, and the two of them fall off of this giant waterfall and die. And he was like, all right, now I don't have to write this stupid story anymore. All these people complained, wearing black armbands as if they were going to a funeral and demanding that Sherlock Holmes be reinstated, to the point where he had to come up with a new story where he said, oh, he was only faking it. And then he did a whole bunch more. Actually, some of the later stories are some of the best ones. But I always think this kind of thing is interesting, where he really didn't, the thing that he's known for, the thing that we were most interested in, he wasn't that important to him. But what he really wanted to work on was this thing about fairies. That's weird. I could have sworn you just said fairies. I love these little, anything that makes me laugh, like, 10 years after I've done it, I figure that's a good sign. But this whole thing about, he was convinced that he had figured out that fairies were real and he could prove it. And this was like the thing that he thought was going to be the most important thing in his life. And it turns out it was these two girls were playing around and taking cameras and taking pictures at the bottom of the garden of what nowadays it's pretty obvious, they're little paper cutouts. And they were just playing around and monkeying around, trying to fool their parents. And then the guy that wrote Sherlock Holmes shows up and says, I believe these girls are telling the truth, and this is definitely proof that they're fake. And they were like, oh, okay. So they basically just kept quiet about it. For years and years, he was convinced that he had discovered this thing. So it's another one where I get to kind of like, we start with the famous story of what everybody knows, and then we go into like some weird stuff that people don't know about this person. And then with this guy, it actually turns out, when I started really digging into what his story was all about, all this was happening right after World War I. And all these thousands and millions of people had died, including his son. And so I think for him, he felt like, if it turns out that actually there really are fairies, he wanted to believe it so much, because if there were fairies, if it was a real thing, maybe there would also be things like heaven, and then all their children were in it. And so it doesn't happen very often, but what's a real honor to me is when I'm able to do one of these stories where you can start with the famous stuff, and then you can go into this weird, what on earth is going on stuff, and then you can come back out to like, well, what did it mean to these people? And sometimes people from the past, they say the past is like a foreign country. Like you can never completely understand what was going on for them, but you can maybe understand a little bit what was going on for them. So that's the goal. When, as I say, it doesn't always happen, but when I can do something like that, I feel really pleased. This is a little snippet of something else I was really proud of in the Storyteller's book. So after each interview, there'll be like a cool drawing that shows like some other facts about that person's life. So if they were an explorer, it might be like the ship that they sailed on, or something about the place that they discovered or whatever. But for the storytellers, we actually did a comic book version of some of their famous stories. So this is a little tiny snippet from Macbeth. So we did a interview with Shakespeare, then I did a 4-page comic book version of Shakespeare's Macbeth, where I get to tell the real story, but also put like, you know, my little snarky comments in it at the same time. So like here, I've got like this dramatic, you know, telling of the story, and then he's thinking, I'm going to have to stab this guy, haven't I? Or I might do something where they're really dramatic in the scene, and I can actually use like the real Shakespearean language. But then I might have some kind of snarky comments in my little narration at the top. So that whole thing was something I was really proud of and pleased to be able to work on. What I wanted to talk to you guys about today is, how do I think about drawing people from history? So there's a couple of things I want to think about. One is historical accuracy. So I guess the three things are historical accuracy, likeness, so getting to look like the person, which I'll do in a minute, and then make it look like a zombie as well, which we'll also be working on. So this one is from my interview with Pocahontas, which is another incredible story, which again, there's a famous story, which some of you guys might have heard. I believe somebody called Disney did a movie about it. But the real story is actually completely different. So this famous story that she and this explorer, John Smith, were in love, completely made up. She was actually, I think it was 8 at the time that they met. So it wasn't like a romantic thing, but they were friends. And then this story that she kind of jumped in, her father was going to kill him, and she jumped in and said, no, don't kill him, I love him, or whatever. Apparently this guy, John Smith, had a tendency to tell these kind of stories. There's at least 2 different stories where he was in completely different parts of the world by himself with, you know, exploring and meeting people who'd never been encountered by English people before. And then he would come back and tell people, oh yes, there was a princess, oh, she fell in love with me, our father tried to kill me. It seems like he had a thing with making up stories that made him like the hero. So first of all, story's not true, but then also the way that she's portrayed. So this kind of way of looking at her is kind of how we think of her in our minds, but there aren't actually pictures. This is an engraving that was either of her, like she sat down and, you know, the artist did it, or it may be an engraving from a painting or something of her. But that's what she actually looked like in life. And when she grew up, she actually married an Englishman, not John Smith, but a totally different guy. So she would have worn, you know, the English clothes at the time. She came to England, met the Queen. So when I was drawing her in my interview, I wanted to make sure that my costumes were as historically accurate as I could make them. So the first thing that I'll always do is, obviously I'll use Google image search, which is great for this stuff. I'm not going to do one for you live, but if you're looking up people, that's usually the first place to start. Books, if you have reference books like that as well, it's also a great place to look. You probably get more, you're more likely to get accurate stuff in a book than you are, because the internet, you've got to be careful about how accurate is the stuff that you're getting. But that's why I'll always then do a little bit of extra reading and see if there's anything about, is the famous portrayal accurate or not? And could I make it more accurate? So then the guy I'm going to use as an example is famous English king and royal jerk, Henry VIII. He doesn't seem to have been a super nice guy, but he's a really fun guy to draw because he's very distinctive. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about some of the research, and then I'm going to show you kind of how I do it. So the first thing I'll do is I'll try and find a bunch of pictures, but he's great because there's all these portraits of him at the time. And the way that they did portraits at the time is they really cared about all the fancy clothes and the details. So you can see all the amazing details on his costume here, all the embroidery. They've got this thing where they would like they make these little cuts in the shirt and then pull the undershirt through to show off like the fancy material it's made from, jewels and stuff all over the place. There's a few portraits of him when he's a bit younger. So I would use these for thinking about like, if I'm drawing the story of his whole life, I might have to draw him as a young man, as an old man, and that kind of stuff. And then I'll think about what's the most famous picture of him. There's like, and then there's also like, you know, if it's a painting, you've got to think about like that guy and that guy doesn't look like the same guy at all. And it's not just that this guy's thinner, like the way that the face is done is not quite the same. So it may be one of these artists was better at getting a likeness, but this one is really the famous picture. So if I'm going to draw Henry, this is the one I'm going to go with. So I'm going to start doing some drawing now, and I'll talk to you while I'm doing it about kind of what I'm looking for. If you would like to draw along, you can. I'm going to leave a little bit time later for you guys to have some drawing time as well. So you might want to just see what I'm doing to begin with, and then I'll hand it over to you in a little bit. So let's see, I've got, let me just check. Yep, so that's up. So, ta-da, there we go. So I've got my picture of Henry over here, and then I've got some space to draw over here. So if I'm looking at him, the first thing that I'm thinking about is like the shape of his head. You don't have to start with the head, but sometimes I quite like to. And one thing that I'll try to do is I'll think about, like, I'll add as many details as feels right. I don't want to do all the details, partly because of time and partly because it's a cartoon. Like, you want to simplify, but I want to get the important details. So I'm thinking about, like, if I say what are the three most important things about how he looks, I would say just he's this huge big guy. And when he got older, he got much fatter even than this. But his whole life, he's a big guy. He's built. And then he's wearing this incredible puffy sleeve cloak thing, which is deliberately designed to make him look even bigger. It's like some kind of medieval shoulder pad suit, right? So just the size of him and the size of his head. I think that cool hat that he's got, where it's kind of off to the side and he's got this fluffy stuff. And something about just like all the bling, like he's got all this gold medallion, jewels and stuff like that. So those are the big things that I want to make sure are in my drawing. So the first thing I'm going to do his head kind of like this. And what I'm looking at is I'm not trying to copy exactly. I mean, if you look at his face over here, it's kind of like almost like that kind of shape, right? But I'm exaggerating because to me, what it feels like is he's really big and heavy. So by making the bottom of this, it's kind of like a blobby sort of ball shape, but by making the bottom of it a bit bigger, I make him feel like he's heavy, like the weight is kind of hanging down. If I do a shape that's more like this, that might be like like a mad professor kind of person, or somebody that thinks a lot, somebody that's way up in their head. But well, here, I tell you what, I'll leave that. Give me just a sec. In case that's interesting. See, this is the lovely thing about drawing on the computer. I can move stuff around. I should emphasize, by the way, I'm drawing on the computer today because it makes it easier to share it with you guys. You do not need to have a computer to draw on. You do not need the fancy software. I'm drawing here in Photoshop, which is kind of the standard, drawing software that most people have. Only because that's what's on the computer, and that's easy for me to share stuff with, with the Phoenix, with my editors and publisher there. You don't need fancy stuff. Pencil and paper is going to work for this absolutely fine. So starting with the shape of his head, I'm going to do the shape of his hat. So his hat has kind of got this kind of stuff, and then I'm just going to do kind of a bobbly cloud kind of shape for, I think it's ostrich feathers, that thing along the top there, though I'm not completely sure. And that's the sort of thing. And then I'm going to add like some jewels and stuff along here. So you can see I'm not trying to copy it exactly. You can add more detail. You could make it more accurate than what I've done here. But when you're drawing a cartoon, you've got to get that balance. It's got to be accurate enough that it feels like that person. But if it's too accurate and it's too much, you're like worrying about getting all the details right, then you lose the fun and the kind of the looseness of drawing. So it's a tightrope. So then I'm going to do these great big shoulder pad things. And then this is a kind of a cool sort of cheat that I like for drawing jewelry. People in the past, especially, kings, queens, people like that, they often have amazing jewelry and stuff. So if you do the top line, so here you can see I've done like, it's kind of almost like a cloud shape, but I've done like, you can see because he's got those bits in between, I've done like a cloud bump and then a straight line in between. And then if you do the bottom one and you just make it match up, roughly, doesn't need to be perfect, but kind of roughly match up, then you can get that kind of shape quite easily. So there we go. I've got like his jewel thing. I'm just going to add some of this stuff. And I'm not going to go and add all. He's almost like a little collar there. I'm not going to add all the details right now, though I might come back and add them later. And then I'm going to do his face. Now, normally I would actually do the face earlier, like I would probably do it as part of drawing the head. But the reason I've paused is because I wanted to talk first about his costume and his likeness, and then talk to you about zombifying. So I apologize in advance. In order to talk about how to draw a zombie, you do have to talk a little bit about what happens to people's bodies after they are dead. It can be a little gross. I'll try and keep it as PG-13 as possible. I mean, when I do my zombies are all very cute, because really Corpse Talk, it's not about like gross zombie stuff. I never have things like, they're trying to eat brains or whatever, because I want to know their story. Really, it's about meeting the person. If you guys in your drawings would like to add extra zombie stuff, like, the gross eyeball hanging out, or there's a bit of the head missing and there's brains poking out or something, please be my guest. Make it as gross as suits you. But for me, I want them to clearly look like a dead person, but I don't want them to be too gross. So what I do is I think about them more as if they are desiccated. So like a mummy or somebody that's has kind of dried out, rather than somebody that's kind of rotted. So the main things that I do are, I'll do the shape of the eye sockets. And again, these are things that it's actually quite expressive. Like you can do different shapes, So like I might do somebody with this kind of shape or this kind of shape. But a lot of the time, and I'll look at the person, I'll look at them and I'd say like, he's got his eyebrows are kind of like that. So I might follow, like I'll look at what do I think his skull is doing underneath that picture. But because he's not completely a skeleton, there's still like a little bit of, kind of dried skin sticking to the face. So that's why he's got these kind of eyelids. It's very weird talking about all this stuff to a camera, because I don't know how gross you guys are finding it the other end. I do apologize. Then I'll do like a kind of a skeleton kind of nose, like the nose has rotted or dried off or whatever. But I'll try and again, I'll base it on what the person looks like in the picture. He's actually got quite a long nose, so I'm making it a bit long. And I think actually looking at him, I've put those too far down. So this is another thing to do with like the shape of the head. If you've got somebody like this, it's a very different feel from somebody who's like this, because this gives you more of that weight on the bottom. And you might even want to do the double chin, which is kind of like a little smiley mouth, but down below the mouth. You can see if I do that. Let's see, but this stuff you can see kind of underneath. So so I'm going to do that for him. I kind of feel like I want a bit more space, but it's okay. There's another thing that's worth talking about, which is I kind of want him to be just a little bit different. But if I'm drawing, certainly if I'm drawing on paper, I mean, on the computer, it's easy to, Control Z and undo all the time. But if I'm drawing on paper, I like to, if I've made a mistake or there's a line that I don't think is quite right, I'll just keep drawing. I used to be terrible for it. Go back and want to fix everything and rub all the lines out. And then I started to try and train myself. Just let it be. If it's completely wrong and you get to the end of the drawing and you look at it and you say, no, I need to fix that, you can fix it then. But if you stop yourself all the way through, you never really get into the drawing because you're too busy kind of correcting yourself. So it's quite important, if you can, just keep drawing. And a lot of the time you'll get to the end of the drawing, you look at it and you'll see, no, actually, it's totally fine. So in this case, I suspect that's going to be true. So I'll give him a little ear. If he was straight on, you would see both ears, but because he's turned a little bit, you can only need to see one, unless this other ear was like, if you had great big ears, you might have it poking out a bit. But here, I think it's enough to just have one little ear. And then one more thing is the expression. So that's why I'm leaving the mouth off, because the eyebrows are the most important thing on the face, or one of the most important things, I should say, for what kind of expression. So what is this person feeling? So you might have angry eyes. I think for Henry, he seems like he's probably a kind of an angry kind of guy. Not all the time, but as he got older and he had this terrible wound in his leg and he couldn't exercise and he'd killed a bunch of his wives, he seemed like he got more and more kind of angry and miserable. I think in this picture, he's probably still in between, like he's still able to enjoy some stuff, ordering executions or banquets, I suspect. So I'm going to give him a bit kind of frowny eyes, but he might have surprise, he might have worry, whatever the person's feeling, you're going to see it mainly in the eyebrows, but then the intensity you're going to see in the mouth. So that means if somebody's frowning, but their mouth is closed like this, then you might have like a small angry expression. Whereas if somebody's like, rah, then the mouth is much bigger, it kind of intensifies. But for him, I think I'm going to mix it because I think he is having fun. So he's going to have a big, but kind of slightly smiley mouth. So he's more like, yes. I'm going to give him, I do this whenever I possibly can. That's why I'm leaving a little bit of space here to give him what I think of as Henry's essential prop at all times, which is a half-eaten chicken drumstick, because I always imagine he's in the middle of some kind of massive medieval banquet. And then the last thing, as this one I love, let's give him there. So he looks a little bit smiley if his eyes are doing that as well. And then the last thing, he still doesn't really look like Henry, even though he's got all this stuff. So whenever I can find like a little detail that really sells who the person is, for him, I think it's this beard. And he doesn't have a big beard, it's quite short, but if you don't include it, it really doesn't quite look like him. So there's my Henry VIII. I'm going to just, let's see. There we go. So I'm going to give you guys just a little bit of time where I'll be, I guess I'll do like some coloring in. I'm going to color him and I may chat a little bit more if things occur to me, but I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to have a go and make a start on your own drawing. It could be Henry. If you would like to work from this, then that's fine. If you've been able to look up people from history, or if you know someone from history that you really like, think about how they look. And remember what I was saying, start with the 3 most important details. You can add more if you want, but those 3 that really sell who they are. You might think about things like the face of their shape, the shape of their nose, any costume kind of stuff, hair, moustache, glasses, things like that. And if you would like to zombify them, you can. If you really can't think of anybody at all, you can do this for yourself. It's actually, I mean, I draw myself all the time, obviously, because I'm in all the cartoons talking to people. If you think about this kind of 3-thing exercise for yourself, it's a great practice of thinking about how to get the essence of how somebody looks. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes on that, and then I think we'll have time for some questions after that. So let me see. So, and if you guys are interested, like I say, I mean, you absolutely don't need Photoshop or any particular software for this stuff. I actually don't use Photoshop for drawing. I do all my drawing either on paper, or these days I've been using the iPad just because it means I can, like if my son is playing in the back garden, I can go and sit and be kind of part of what's going on. So it's pretty lovely when I can do that. But if you're drawing on the computer, then the nice thing is that you can use layers, which is almost like different sheets of paper. So I can have the drawing on one layer, and now I'm doing coloring underneath. For my zombies. Again, because I don't want them too gross, you know? a little bit gross. So I try and give them a kind of grey kind of colour, but not completely grey and not kind of green or anything, which is kind of extra spooky. I'm going to change this brushes. Taking ages. We do all the colouring on the computer as well. That's one other. So once I've drawn it, I'll then get it onto the computer. And Lisa, my wife, is the colorist for Corpse Talk, which is great. She's really good. So she'll colour it. So she'll get basically like the black and white drawings like this, and then she'll go through and do all the colour. And then I'll look at it and I'll sometimes tweak it a little, say, oh, well, this guy's hat has to be red because of something in the story or whatever. And I really think that, this should be nighttime. And then she'll look at it and say, what have you done? You've ruined all my colours. This is terrible. And she'll change it all. She won't change it all back, but we'll have a friendly, professional discussion about what the colours. And they always turn out amazing, thanks to her. So it's a real treat that she's a part of it. Give them a little bit of kind of gross teeth. When I started doing Corpse Talk, I would draw all the teeth. Well, yeah, I meant to talk about that because that's another zombie thing. Is as somebody kind of dries out, the skin kind of pulls back. This is the gross bit. So that's why the teeth are kind of revealed. So they've got this kind of corpsey looking mouth. When I started, I would draw all the teeth, and then I was like, you know what, it's too gross. It's an interesting thing, actually. You see this a lot. People that are drawing a comic and they want to make the character look a bit kind of gross or scary or whatever, they might draw all the teeth and actually outline all of them. I wonder if I can show you what I mean if I do this. I suspect he's going to look pretty cute whatever I do. But if I just do this, if I draw every single tooth, especially if I make them a bit kind of uneven looking. Do you see that? Already he looks just a little bit kind of spookier and grosser and kind of scarier. Whereas if you draw just the shape of the teeth, so it might be a perfectly smooth shape, you could draw them just straight like that. I give them a little bit of these kind of bumpy ends because I want them to look like real people with uneven teeth. And in the past, as we all know, the dentistry wasn't great, so you'd expect them to have kind of bumpy, uneven teeth, even kings and queens. But if you keep it as like one shape, so you're not outlining every single tooth, it looks a bit smoother, I guess, which makes it feel a bit more friendly and less kind of, especially when it's a zombie, less gross. Okay. So this is the point where if I was in the room with you guys, I'd come around and see what you're doing. So I'm really sorry I can't see that because I bet you there's lots of awesome comics drawings going on out there. But given that we can't do that, I can answer questions and chat more about either what we've been doing here or any other things about Corpse Talk, or indeed about whatever you want to ask within reason. I always say that you're welcome to ask any questions that you like, even questions that I've heard before. But if you can ask a question that I've never heard before, there's extra bonus brownie points for that. So, Ambreen, do you want to come back and we'll start moving on to question and answer stuff whenever people are ready.
Okay. First of all, that looks so good. I probably would not be able to draw that no matter how much I follow that tutorial. But we do have a few questions in. I think this
Great.
one's quite straightforward. Steph has asked, what age are your books for?
Oh, sure. So, it's not quite as straightforward from my end. So, the Phoenix, we say the target audience is roughly 8 to 12. So, that's the target age range that I'm thinking about when I'm writing, and what might they know already, and what's the right level of language and that kind of stuff. We do have kids as young as 5 or 6 reading, especially if they're reading with parents and you can chat about them. I mean, I have a great time. So, my son is 6, and we read them. I read them to him at dinner time, and then as I go through, I'll stop and we'll talk about what's in it, and he may have questions and stuff as we go through. And we do have people. I mean, I've readers, adult readers as well. If you're interested in history, and or zombies, I guess, it's a great way to engage with it, because there are so many people that are not so well known that I'll try and include, or not so well known stories. And because the way that I try and think about it is, I'm thinking about 8 to 12-year-olds, but I'm thinking about really smart, engaged, interesting 8 to 12-year-olds, which I think pretty much all of them are. Because of thinking about it like that, it means the stories and the way that I approach the content is still totally interesting and engaging for adults as well, because I'm not talking. One of the main things, the most important thing to me, is not talking down to the kids that are reading it, because they are interested and they are able to understand deep stuff and difficult stuff and complicated stuff. It's just my job to make sure it's presented really clearly and also in a funny, engaging way.
Yeah, I think I'm an adult, and I absolutely love reading this, and I think it is quite incredibly informative, like, from a historical perspective, if you're an adult. And I have been reading it to my 5-year-old, so I don't think think there's like an age limit as per se. Steph also wants to know, how did you come up with the concept of your books, and how many books have you written so far?
Yep. Well, the concept is an absolutely genius idea, which I say with no shame or whatever, because it is Lisa's genius idea. This is another part of basically, so I do the most, like the bulk of the writing and the drawing. As I said, she does the color. But we do write it in collaboration. Like, I talked the whole thing through with her, but it was her idea. So basically, I'd done a little bit of stuff with the guys at the Phoenix before, so they knew I could do kind of non-fiction-y kind of stuff, and they came to me and said, could you do a non-fiction thing about famous people for us? So that was the initial kind of thing. They initially wanted it to be about modern famous people, and I did a few kind of test things, and I realized I'm going to get sued if I do this, because I'm going to do something about somebody that they're not going to like, and I want to be able to say whatever I think. So then I had the idea, well, if they were all dead people, I won't get in trouble, because you can't, like, libel laws stop when people die. Basically, that was the kind of the start point. And then I had all these terrible ideas about, like, okay, there's going to be time traveling kids, or I'm like, what am I going to do? And Lisa said, well, first of all, you should be in it, because you draw yourself all the time anyway. And second of all, why not just have them as zombies and interview them as zombies? And I said, that is the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. And I would never in a million years have thought of it, but it just works so well at so many different levels. The zombie thing is so fun. The interview thing works so well in terms of, there's all these different ways you can come at it. Like, I can ask a modern question that those people wouldn't have thought of, but that we want to know about. Or I can ask a really stupid question that just allows them to explain something to make sure everybody's on the same page. Or I can, like I was trying to do with Columbus, I can kind of prick the bubble and, have a different take on how they would like. And then they can argue back and say, no, that's not really fair, because whatever, So it's a wonderful idea, and I'm very lucky to be married to her for many reasons, of which that's one. And how many books have we written? There are now 6 books. But because they're originally in the Phoenix magazine, and then they're kind of collected, there's way more interviews than we have books. So I think we're at it's over 150 people that I've interviewed, of which a lot of them are in the books, but by no means all of them. So maybe some of them will be in future books. We'll see how it goes.
Hannah wants to know, you've touched on this at the beginning, but how do you decide who to include in your comics and books?
Yeah, it's a good question. So initially, when we first started doing Corpse Talk in the Phoenix, it was just random. I mean, it was just me and my editor would sit down and kind of chat about who would we like to interview and who do we think would be. Phoenix particularly really wanted to make sure they had lots of big names at the beginning. So who's really famous? Who will kids know? Who would be fun to have on the show, basically. So we did maybe about a year of doing it that way. Then we started asking readers to write in with questions. So we just open up each week, we'd say, hey, if you've got an idea, write in. And we got these amazing people that I would never have heard of, that there's, kids out there that are like totally obsessed with this one obscure historical person. We got some of the best people we've got have been from that process of just kids writing in saying, hey, have you heard of so-and-so? So we did probably a couple of years of interviews on that basis with kids writing in. And then there were two books that we did initially that were just collections of just in the order that I'd done them, basically. So the first ones that I did. But then the Phoenix guys said, well, look, we really think we should do them as themed books, which has actually been a brilliant idea. So then, like we said, well, the first one was scientists. So we said, okay, what scientists have we got? We looked at all the ones that I've done and we said, okay, we've got enough scientists to fill 2/3 of this book, let's say. So we know we need this many more interviews, this many more pages. We'd look at our list and see who's not on the list. Are there really famous people that we've not covered that have got to be in there? Are there enough women? The answer is always no. But as you know, there's not enough women written about in history. So I'll go back and find all these amazing women that we haven't heard enough about. But then I've also got to balance that with, will I really be able to do an interview? Because sometimes they sound really cool, but there's just not enough biographical information for me to actually string it out, which is the most frustrating thing. Sometimes even a little snippet might be enough and I can expand it and I can talk about the time that they lived and this kind of stuff. So we get that balance. Make sure there's enough people from different parts of the world, enough people from different time periods in history. Like we'll look at the timeline and say, well, we don't have any of the Middle Ages in here. Who are we going to get? Once we feel like that balance is about right, and the book is full, then I'll just draw them up. So since we've been doing themed books, the process is more like we'll look at the book and we'll think about who's going to be in that. And then whoever's going to be in the book can also be in the magazine, which is great. And then once I've finished, scientist, then we went on to the next book and went through the whole process again.
I think, yeah, that's one of the things that really blew me away was the diversity and the time frame in these books. I was talking to
I spent a lot of time on it, so thank you.
I was talking to a few other people who've also read this, and we were saying just how the fact that it's just all of history. They're not, because sometimes when a lot of people write about history, they'll choose like a certain time period, but you've made sure to just open it up, so there's like vast possibilities at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, it's so important because it is a chance to talk to people about stuff that they ought to know, but we all not ought to know about, and we don't because of the way that history gets chopped up in school, or the things that we get given and the things that kind of get slid under the rug. So it's a chance to talk about that. And also it's just so much more interesting. Like, there's all this amazing stuff. I mean, I was never really into history in school, and now, I mean, it's been great for me because I know all this stuff about history that I would never have known otherwise. But it's so much more interesting if you open that up, because there's these amazing stories and these amazing places and time periods and contexts that it's just so fun to learn about. So, but yeah, thank you. I do spend quite a lot of time on that sort of, who have we got? And then again, when you start really looking, there are amazing people out there that just maybe don't get as much airtime as they should. So it's a real honor to be able to share them with people.
We've got Steph again asking, what's the best tip you can give to a budding young artist?
Best tip is just keep drawing. And I'm going to try and talk about that a little bit more than just that. There you go. Keep drawing. I'm done. But genuinely, I mean it, because for me, I mean the experience that I had, I mean, when I was a kid, I loved drawing and I did it a lot. And I think because I did it a lot, people say, "Oh, you're good at drawing." I was like, "Oh, good. I'm good at drawing. I'm going to do this more." So if you enjoy drawing and people are saying you're good at it, then you'll tend to do more, which means you get better. But you're getting better. Not, I mean, the people will often say, "Oh, I can't draw," or whatever. We don't all start from the same level. Like, some people do have more of a natural aptitude. It's not a made up thing, but it's more what happens is if you've got a little bit of an aptitude and then you do it a lot because you're saying to yourself, "Oh, I'm good at this," or people are saying you're good at it, then you do a lot. It's the practice that makes you get better. The aptitude might give you that initial kind of push or that initial encouragement, but if you keep drawing, keep practicing, and keep stretching yourself, so you're not just drawing the same stuff you always do, but try to always be a beginner. I mean, it's hard when I'm doing it as a job because I've got to just get it down. So I've always got to be. So another wonderful thing about Corpstock is I'm forced to draw things that are hard, or forced to draw things that I wouldn't do otherwise, like some weird, I don't know, 17th century navigational instruments. Now I've got to look them up and figure out how to draw them, or boats. Historical boats are such a nightmare with all the ropes and stuff. But it's good because it stretches me, So if you can do that, keep trying to draw difficult things that you don't, just not the stuff you're already good at. Somebody that started out as like they were quite good at drawing when they were a kid, but then they don't really practice and they don't carry on for whatever reason, won't be as strong at drawing as somebody that wasn't that good when they were a kid, but they kept it up. So that at whatever age you are and whatever stage you're starting from, just remember, you're never going to be as good as you want. You're always going to look at your own drawings and say, it's not that good. It's not as good as so-and-so that you've got in your mind. Everybody has that. You never get over it, but you do maybe learn to keep it to one side. And you can do that at any stage. So if you can learn to put that aside and just have fun doing this wonderful human activity that we all do know how to do and we all deserve to do, without worrying about how good it is, but maybe do worry about what can I learn while I'm doing this, and how can I get a little bit better or challenge myself a little bit. That's really the only, I mean, there are things that you can learn from a good teacher or from a good book or whatever, but that's the most important way to learn, and you do it in yourself. And if you can do that, and if you can keep going, because as you get older, you start to see more good artists and you start to compare yourself with other people more, so it becomes harder and harder to just enjoy what you're doing. But if you can keep a hold of that, you're always going to get better and you're always going to have fun. And the more fun you're having, the more you're going to learn. I mean, that's true of everything, but it's super true of drawing.
I think that's
the long version of the keep drawing answer.
I think that's great advice. I think it's a bit like writing, isn't it? Some people learn before others and some people take time, but eventually everyone learns how to write.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like anything, sports is like this. Any skill that's hard to learn but is worth doing is going to have some of this in it. It's just normally people don't think about that. Like when you're young, you kind of have, I'm good at this thing, so I'm going to do it more. When I'm not good at this, I'm not going to do it at all. But yeah, I mean, just what I just said, you keep it up, you are going to get better at anything.
Yeah. This next question, I'm so excited to hear the answer for. And it's, Steph says, my son says, if you could go back in history, who would you like to be for the day?
Oh, that's a really good and tough question, because for a day is helpful, because if it was like, would you like to go back in history with the horrible diseases and the chance that you're almost certainly going to, if you go back in history and you live there, you're almost certainly going to be some kind of peasant farmer, because 99.9% of people in all of history, that's who they were. And the people that we hear about are not what most people's lives were like. But if I was going to just do it for one day, then I'm torn, because on the one hand, there's things like these awful, like, historical battles or something like that, which just, it doesn't exist anymore. Like, could you go back and see, like, what was, like, a cavalry charge of knights? What did it look like, or like a siege? Like, what did that actually look like? We kind of know, but we don't really know. So then also think about things like, what I would do. I would go back to the Library of Alexandria, and I would either steal as many books as possible, which are now completely lost, like this library of all this wisdom and all these amazing things that are now completely lost because it was burned at some point. I would, if I'm allowed to bring them back, I would steal as many books as possible that we've lost and bring them back. And if I wasn't allowed to steal them, I would just read as many books or, like, copy them out. I'm trying to, like, I don't speak ancient Greek, but I'm just going to copy this down and bring it back so that somebody's going to be able to read this, and we're going to find out, like, just these heartbreaking things of how much we could have known about people's lives and what they knew and all this kind of stuff. I think if I didn't do that, a lot of historians would be very angry with me. So yeah, that's my answer.
Could you possibly imagine the amount of corpse talk series you could have if you stole the contents from the library?
I know, exactly. Alexander the Great, or whoever it was, because there's different stories about it, has a lot to answer for that one.
For your books, this is a quite interesting one. How long did the research take you for each book and for each person?
Oh, too long is the short answer. It depends. I mean, it does depend on the person. So if I know a bit about them already, obviously that's a bit quicker, but it'll also come down to, like, if there's some kind of controversy or there's some kind of new research about this person, and I want to make sure that I've got it right. That can sometimes take a bit longer. And also it's how I'm feeling. Like, if I feel confident, like, yeah, I've got it, I know what I'm saying about this, then that's quicker. Whereas I'm like, oh God, I don't want to get this one wrong. And is it this or is it this? And this historian says this, but I don't know if I completely trust them or not. Because, I mean, as we go forward, like, people discover new things or there's new takes on things. So I want to be aware of, like, the current thinking. But sometimes the most recent person you look at and you say, that's a historian that's just trying to kind of make a name for themselves with, I've got the true story. And it's not actually changing the old story all that much, So I'm trying to weigh these things up all the time. And as I write, I'll then find things like, oh, well, this story about when this guy was 8 years old is really interesting. Can I find a bit more about this? Is this really a true story? And whatever, or there's this important thing I don't understand what that is. Can I research the historical stuff a bit more?
Yeah.
So there's a back and forth. It usually is, I'd say it's between about a week and 3 weeks of that kind of back and forth research and writing and then going back to it. If I can get it done in about a week or two, that's reasonable. 2 weeks, I'm starting to go, oh, come on, I want this done. 3 weeks is, oh no, because I get paid by the page, not by how long it takes. So if it takes too long, it starts to, it's cost me money, but at the same time, I've got to get it right. So if I'm agonizing about, I just want it done, it takes longer because I'm going to have to go back and do it right one way or the other. So I might as well get it right first time, even if it takes a bit longer. So, and then for how long each book takes, it's just, you've got to add that up. So it's between a week to 3 weeks of research and writing. And then the drawing these days is fairly quick. I used to get agonized about that as well, but now I can usually get one done in about a week. So between 2 and 4 weeks per person, and then however many people are in the book, you can add it up if you like. But they're not all done in one go. Like I said, some of them were done 10 years ago when we started. Some of them I've done specially for the book, so it's kind of in between. And then there is also, so at the end of each one, so there's the interview, And then there's also, at the end of each, we started doing these for the books, there's also going to be like one of these big, it's like a big 2-page, we call it a spread. So it's like 2 pages, a big drawing spread over 2 pages with lots of like cool facts and stuff like that. So that's a chance to do something extra about the person's life. This one's about Darwin's finches. So when Darwin went to the Galapagos, he spotted all these finches that were similar but different. So this is a chance to talk a bit more about the theory of evolution and how it works. So each one has one of those. So that's an extra. So in the Explorers book, we then also had these maps of like where they went, and those took ages because I wanted them to look a little bit like historical maps. So I was researching like what maps looked like in the Middle Ages and stuff. But if they look too much like historical maps, they're going to be completely inaccurate because, of course, the maps back then were hopeless in terms of where things actually are. So I had to kind of balance that. But it was also really fun. And I think the Explorers book, it really adds because you can then, when you read the interview, you can then go and look at the map and see, well, where did this guy go and how does that fit in with places that you already know about? So those things are maybe an extra week or so as well per person.
Yeah. Wow. I would not have the patience to be able to research for that long.
It's a lot. But but like I say, I mean, it's worth it,
Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the hour, but I want to finish up with this question that I liked it. I found it quite light-hearted, and I'm guessing this is referring to your wife. Do you ever fight over which direction to take the comics in?
Yes. But in a really helpful way, to be honest with you. I mean, we've never had a kind of a bitter, marital battle over which direction, because I think we do have a similar sense of what's important. But we will, I mean, at the beginning stages, so I'll do the initial research and then we'll chat about it, and I'll kind of, we'll go for a walk and we'll sit down and I'll say, well, here's what I've got. And Lisa's very good at like, what's interesting, because I'll get all lost in the weeds of all these details and she'll be like, okay, so don't include that. It's not interesting. Don't include that. It's not appropriate. This stuff is cool. That's interesting. And when you can see her kind of light up, I'm like, okay, that's actually good stuff. So I kind of rely on her as a kind of a sounding board for this stuff. And we might have different takes on it, but usually we're reasonably on the same page. The writing, it is mostly my thing. So I will always listen to her and I always take it really seriously what she's saying, but I will sometimes make a final decision on it. And then the same thing with the colors. Then I draw it up, and then the coloring is her thing. So she's in charge, but I will come in and say, I mean, sometimes it's fun. Like I said, it could be functional stuff. Oh, this guy's famous for having a red coat or whatever. Sometimes it's kind of, I want it to look more like this. And then we will argue about that a bit, because she'll always be like, what are you doing with these colors? I thought they were good. Boys' colors is her ultimate kind of put down, because she thinks that and boys in general tend to make things very literal. So brown things will be brown, and things will be the real colors. And also things will be more kind of gray, brown or gray kind of colors. It looks all muddy, where she really pumps it up and makes them very, very colorful, and also very kind of like, how ought it to feel, And I'm like, no, but it's got to be accurate. And she's, no, it's got to be fun. It's a very helpful process, So she does have final say on what the colors are. If I can make some changes, and she's like, yeah, actually, that's good. That's what I feel really proud, because I'm like, yes, convinced the most difficult critic in the world. But it's a helpful kind of butting heads process, and we know we're going to get something good in the end.
I think it's all, teamwork is always good, and two heads are always better than one when you come into great ideas. I want to say thank you so much for coming today. That was incredibly lovely LAL session. Enjoyed it so much. If I can just get you to stay on there for me, and I just tell everyone the next LAL session. So just to let you all know, though, this is Adam's Twitter. So just here, you can go follow him on Twitter, and this is the Instagram link. You can go follow on there as well. And to check out Adam's other work, just go visit his website. You can see the other books that he's wrote as well. Now, for the next Lal. Next time on Lal, we will have Kate DiCamillo. She's a Carnegie Medal nominated and Newbery Medal winning author, and we'll talk about her book, The Beatrice Prophecy. And now, The Beatrice Prophecy is a fantastical meditation on fate, love, and power of words to spell the world. So keep your eyes out on our website to check when that's available. I'm just going to leave you a quote from the book that I absolutely love, and it's, "We shall all, in the end, be led to where we belong. We shall all, in the end, find our way home." And I hope that you'll all tune in next time, and I'll see you then. Bye.